Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by Shared Services Link and sponsored by Avalara. Today, we are going to be looking at the 5 common e-invoicing mistakes that companies keep making. My name is Sarah Fain, and I am the head of content at Shared Services Link. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Sandra Bakuni, the Senior Sales Exec, e-invoicing and live reporting at Avalara. You, of course, our listeners today have a very important role to play as well, and that is just to make sure that you get the most out of this hour. One of the best ways to do that is send us your questions nice and early. The best way to do so is using the question functionality, which is usually over on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you do that, we'll be taking your questions in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Just to preempt some of the most commonly asked questions, the slides will be available and the recording will also be available on a shared services link shortly after the webinar. And again, if you like what you hear today, please do let us know. Let us know on LinkedIn, reach out to us, reach out to our speakers. We really just do love to hear from you. Just a quick disclaimer that we do hope you find this information helpful, but this is for informational purposes and is not legal or tax advice. So we will be discussing today the findings of our recent research study. E-invoicing is having a bit of a moment right now. Compliance is driving many organizations to invest in e-invoicing at a pace that we really haven't seen before. So we conducted a survey with 100 members of our global audience to find out the key drivers behind e-invoicing and where people's priorities are at the moment. One of the most interesting questions we asked is what people wish they knew before e-invoicing. So based on that, we'll be sharing our findings and also looking at some of the mistakes that companies keep making when it comes to e-invoicing, and importantly, how you can avoid it. Sandra will also be providing some updates on Vita, France, Germany, Poland, Belgium, what's happening in some of the major countries at the moment. And again, we'll have some time for Q&A. But first, we want to just check in with our audience. So we want to understand, where are you on your e-invoicing journey? Do you have a mature e-invoicing solution in place? Are you looking to expand or enhance e-invoicing? Are you just about to implement e-invoicing, or are you just researching at the moment? So it's just great to hear from you, to get a pulse of who's on the line today. I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, oh, we got a great audience today with over 70% of you voting. I like it. So let's share those results. So a bit of a mixed bag here. So we have 12% of you, so you have a mature invoicing in place. 28% so looking to enhance or expand e-invoicing. 24% are just about to implement e-invoicing, and 36% are in the research stage. So really interesting. Most people are kind of relatively early on the journey, or looking to expand. So I think that's quite interesting to see.
It is quite a mixed bag, isn't it? I would have expected a bit more of a yes or a no, but no, it's interesting to see that a lot of people are still doing quite a lot of research, coming up to all the mandates that are rolling out.
Absolutely. So I think you're in the right place if you're looking for a bit of a pulse check here. So the survey results that we're going to be talking about today are from our audience. And again, while it's a global audience, people who ended up taking the survey were largely from our European base. So 73% of our results were from Europe, 20% from North America, and a few from Middle East and Asia. And just so you can understand about who taken the survey, the majority had already implemented and established e-invoicing in their organization, 54%. 24% had very recently implemented e-invoicing, 22% were looking. So the majority of people you'll be hearing from today have implemented e-invoicing.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, this is really interesting, isn't it? And I think it's clear to see that e-invoicing is no longer just a future goal for most organizations, and especially in Europe, because we've already embraced it quite a lot. And what we see here is that over half of respondents saying that they've implemented some type of e-invoicing strategy internally. Now, from my perspective, despite this progress, we still see companies falling into the same traps time and time again. And we're hoping we'll be taking you through all of this down the line. However, from our perspective, if you're just starting out today or have recently gone live, I'm sure you'd appreciate that the journey doesn't end at implementation. So we'll explore the 5 most common mistakes companies keep making with e-invoicing. So hopefully you can avoid the pitfalls that hold back efficiency, compliance, and of course, not forgetting ROI. So we want to make sure that your digital transformation delivers real value and not just another tick box.
Absolutely. So one of the first questions that we asked our audience was, what is actually driving e-invoicing at your organization? And you can see the chart on the right here, 51% said they were driven by compliance, and that's compliance with the invoicing mandates coming into force or already in force. So that came out the winner. The runner-up, 45%, which is also significant, were really focused. The main driver was improving efficiency, processing more invoices with fewer resources. And just 4% cited that it was about improving working capital through supply chain financing, dynamic discounting. It's interesting to note there actually was a fourth option on this poll, and that was whether it was, looking at enhanced security to combat fraud, cybersecurity, but nobody had ticked that. So the top 2 priorities really are compliance and efficiency.
Yeah, I think if we take a closer look at what's really driving this e-invoicing adoption in today's organizations, and according to our poll, as we can see, half of you say that compliance with mandates is your main driver, efficiency coming in as a close second. So to me, it tells that while regulatory pressures are pushing your companies to act, there's a real appetite to unlock operational gains, such as processing more invoices with fewer resources, right? So what's interesting is that very few of you are focused on using e-invoicing to improve working capital. Now, for me, this highlights a key opportunity. As we move beyond compliance, the real leaders here will be those who leverage e-invoicing, not just to meet regulations, but to drive end-to-end process transformation and unlock cash flow, build resilience against those emerging risks. And the organizations that look beyond the immediate mandate and focus on the broader value will ultimately future-proof their finance operations and gain true competitive edge.
So I think that's a common thing that we see with the more mature organizations that have implemented. They implement for
Yeah.
one reason, and then they end up staying, with it for many other reasons. So one of the other things we wanted to look at our audience, and I appreciate there's a lot on the screen here, but we're going to break this down in the next few slides, is what are the features and benefits that were important to you when selecting an e-invoicing provider? Now, I put this all on one slide. I know it's a lot, but just to show you, the huge amounts of actually features and benefits. And we ask
Yeah.
people to choose their top 5 here. So just, the things that really stand out here is that it's, compliance, it's integration, and improving efficiency. And down you can look at some of the ones out at the bottom, and we'll get into that in more detail later. But it'd be good just to take your high-level view on this, Sandra.
Yeah, I think, like you said, when it comes to selecting an invoicing provider, there's a clear hierarchy here of priorities which are emerging from your responses. Compliance and required countries, seamless integrations with existing systems, and efficiency improvements are top of the mind for most organizations, which is great. And with factors like global footprint and user experience also playing a significant role, which are all good signs, right? Now, to help make sense of these findings, like you said, Sarah, we've broken them down into priorities and explore each in the next few slides. So maybe we can jump into that.
Absolutely. So this just zooms on the highest priorities here, those ones at the top that really stood out. And you can see that 68% of people cited compliance in required countries as one of the key features and benefits of looking at. 65% were looking at seamless integration with their existing systems, for example, their ERPs. And 59% cited they wanted efficiency improvement with invoice processing. So again, it's tied to the main drivers really here around compliance and efficiency, but also integration.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, what we see in here is a clear shift in how organizations are approaching e-invoicing, not just as a compliance checkbox, but as a strategic lever for transformation. Now, of course, meeting mandates is very critical, but the real opportunity here lies in how seamlessly these solutions can integrate into the broader finance ecosystems. Now, from what I hear in the market, companies are no longer want fragmented tools. They're looking for unifying platforms that can automate, connect, and scale with organizations. And efficiency today is not just about byproduct anymore. It's a business driver, right? So the leaders in this space, they're not just reacting to regulations, they're using them as a launchpad for smarter, faster, and more resilient finance operations.
Right. Yeah, I like what you said, the automate, connect, and scale. I think that summarizes it also really nicely. Um, so let's dive into some of the medium priorities. So on that big list, these were ones that they hovered more around the third mark. So about a third of people cited one of these as a medium priority. So people were looking at the global footprint of the service provider as a top priority. 35% also cited the ability to handle all invoice types, electronic, paper, PDF. 32% cited the user experience. They wanted something that's easy to use for both their users and suppliers. 31% were focused on the cost accessibility of the tool, and 27% said it's the ability to handle both AP and AR invoices. So it'd be good to get your take on these more medium priorities.
Yeah, of course, Sarah. And I think beyond the top priorities of compliance and integration, we see a second tier of capabilities that are quietly defining what it means to have a truly scalable e-invoicing strategy. So things like global reach, support for all invoice formats, and user experience are no longer nice to haves. They are now foundational in a world where business operates cross borders and suppliers span a wide range of digital maturity. Now, while cost is still a factor, and there's no denying that, it's clear that organizations are prioritizing value over lower price. So things like the ability to manage both AP and AR also signals us a growing shift towards holistic and life cycle based thinking. So these elements may be medium priorities on paper today, but they are what transform compliance driven adoption into long-term operational successes.
Yeah, no, I think that's really insightful there on the growing priorities that we're seeing. Um, So I also now want to zone into the lower priorities. So these ones is, less than 20% of people pick these as one of their top 5 priorities. So 18% said it's about the reliability and the responsiveness of the support. 18% cited high security measures. 15%, which I think was actually fairly low, and that's effectiveness of onboarding suppliers. As we see, long term with the invoicing, onboarding suppliers being a key factor. So it's interesting to see only 15% of people cited that as a top priority. Financial stability of the service provider, again, fairly low at 8%. And again, 8% seems fairly low for strong customer references and reputation. I know just as a consumer, when we look at big technology purchases, customer references and reputation, generally I feel it would be quite high, but that's only 8% here. 5% said the ability for dynamic discounting, 4% is the transparencies, the responsibilities with white labeled solutions, and just 3% cited they want to see clear contracted service level agreements. So it'd be good to get your take on what's maybe
Yeah.
surprising here, standing out.
Thanks, Sarah. I think what's most revealing about these so-called low priorities is how they highlight areas where organizations may be underestimating long-term risks and opportunity. Now, in today's environment where cyber threats and supply chain disruptions are growing, so factors like security, support, responsiveness, and supplier onboarding certainly shouldn't be an afterthought. They are genuinely foundational. Now, talking about supplier onboarding, I mean, coming in at just 15% is a key concern here. Now, it's a telling sign that, historically, e-invoicing mandates have been the domain of accounts receivable. The focus has been on outbound invoicing, getting invoices out the door in a compliant format, while accounts payable and the challenge of onboarding suppliers into digital processes has often been overlooked. Now, I'll be happy or I'll be happy to tell you that the landscape is changing rapidly. So with the rollout of EU's VAT in a Digital Age initiative and the new mandates in countries like France, Belgium and Poland, which we'll be touching upon later down this webinar, accounts payable is moving to the front and center in the compliance conversations. So these new regulations require organizations not only to send invoices electronically, but also to able to receive, process, and validate incoming e-invoices from a diverse supplier base. So that means onboarding suppliers, many of whom may not be digitally mature at all, becomes a critical success factor.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think onboarding is going to be important for anybody who's on their journey. But one thing we appreciate when we're putting these slides together is that the priorities will often depend on who is managing e-invoicing and who really owns it. So we want to just understand from our audience quickly about who actually owns e-invoicing in your organization. You can take more than one here. So if it really is truly owned by different departments, but often it does lean towards one. So is it owned by AP in your organization, AR, procurement, IT, tax? So it'd be great to hear from your perspective, the key or the key two departments or that are owning e-invoicing in your organization. So good to see lots of you voting. And if you want to tick the option that best matches your situation, I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and the results are coming up on your screen now. So the most popular option was 55% cited AP, sorry,
AP.
48%, which seems fairly high to me, IT, 38% said it was tax, which again is a bit high, I think, 34% AR, and just 10% procurement. So it'd be good to take on if, how this reflects who you talk with in the market, Sandra.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I talk to customers on a daily basis about this, and IT seems to hold the budget still today. And so often you speak to IT, and they haven't actually spoken to their finance department, haven't taken into consideration what they need. So I think the conversation, and I'll be touching upon that later down in my presentation. The conversation needs to change. It's no longer IT project, AP project, or AR project. In fact, it's organization-wide project. So all of those teams need to get together and have a conversation. But it's good to see that AP has come in at 55%. That's quite surprising.
Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it might be reflective of our audience as well. People
Mm.
who, shared service link readers. And I just do see one question coming in about how to, were these questions answered by tax departments? I'll have a bit more detail in the follow-up report that comes from this. But yes, it was a mixture of finance, and tax, and a bit of procurement people who took the survey as well. So interesting to see the owners there. And another key aspect we want to look at when it comes to e-invoicing is, some people think they can use their ERP to handle a lot of e-invoicing, but we want to get a sense of the trust in that and how much trust do our survey listeners have in their ERP's ability to manage e-invoicing. So 42% said it was high. They do believe that ERP can handle all needs in most countries, but most organizations had some doubts. 32% said they can do some with their ERP, but they're unsure about compliance in key countries. 18% said their ERP offers limited capability and they are quite concerned about compliance in key countries, and 8% said zero, they just don't trust their ERP to manage e-invoicing. So I'd like to get your take on this as well. And I think our audience will probably sympathize with that ERPs are generally not built with, things like tax and compliance and e-invoicing mandates in mind.
Yeah, this is a topic that I'm particularly interested in. So looking at this, at the poor ERP trust level, there's a really fascinating disconnect here that we need to, I think, address. So while 42% of organizations express high confidence in their ERP's ability to handle e-invoicing requirements, much to what you're saying, Sarah, most of ERP systems weren't really designed with today's complex global compliance landscape in mind at all. So that's the first. Now, today, this is a critical moment to thoughtfully evaluate your ERP provider's capabilities around e-invoicing. So ask whether their solution is truly scalable. So can it grow not just with your transaction volume, but also as you expand into the new markets and with different regulatory requirements? Consider whether your ERP offers an open network approach rather than point-to-point connection. So does your ERP provider facilitate this connectivity, or are you building separate integrations for each market? So that's an important question to raise when you speak into your ERP provider. Another thing to consider is the PEPL network model. So now it's used in over 39 countries and predicted to connect to over 1 million businesses. Now ask your ERP provider, are they a PEPL access provider? Now, another crucial point is whether your ERP can support a comprehensive e-invoicing strategy across both accounts payable and accounts receivable. Like we said, this has become quite a big topic today. So organizations that manage both AP and AR through a unified approach certainly gain significantly more value than focusing on only compliance or only NP and having a patchwork of systems. And I think most importantly, have a transparent conversation with your ERP provider about responsibility for mandate change. So when governments modify requirements, and they, believe me, very frequently do, who bears the responsibility for implementing those changes? Is it your internal team, your ERP provider, or some specialized third-party provider? Now, understanding this responsibility matrix before you face in a compliance deadline can really prevent significant disruption. So, in a nutshell, the world of e-invoicing is moving towards integration, automation, and standardization. So the right approach isn't really about finding quick fixes for immediate compliance issues, but building a very flexible foundation that transforms regulatory requirements into opportunities for process improvement and business value for you internally.
Okay, I think there's a lot of really good, great things you said there. I think those are 3 great things to be asking your ERP provider about, their PEPL, AP and AR, with the ability to keep up with mandate changes. And again, just seeing e-invoicing is more than just a, a thing you have to do, but something that can drastically improve your organization when it does well. So I think that's excellent insight there. Well, now on to my favorite question in the survey. And we asked people, what do you wish you had known before starting your e-invoicing journey? So I think, again, a great one for people fairly early on the journey here. And the top response here, 45% of people said, oh, we wish we knew that e-invoicing is not a plug and play solution. You can't just install it and go. It involves significant system integration work. A close second here is that 42% said they wish they knew more about the business case and the full impact of e-invoicing, which I think you've brought up again in this webinar, but again, people don't always see the full picture. 35% cited they wish they had a greater understanding of the technology, its age, functionality, and user experience. Just as some colors, some people said, the technology sometimes maybe they found one that was causing them problems they didn't realize they'd have, but really investing early on a good understanding of technology. 27% said the need to choose a provider capable of handling a global program. 26% cited a greater clarity on costs, the integration fee, costs, the implementation, and ongoing fees. 15% said they wish they knew the importance of rigorously assessing the provider's compliance in key countries. And 11% cited they wish they knew the value of working with a supplier that manages a supplier onboarding. But again, the key ones, the top 2, is that it's not plug and play, and there is a wider business case here. So I'd love to get your take on this as well.
And Sarah, I would absolutely agree here, right? Because one of the most dangerous misconceptions that I hear about is the idea of a plug and play solution. Now, let me be honest and transparent. In the real world of global e-invoicing, there is simply no such thing. So with over 40 countries already implementing various mandates, each with their own technical specifications, formats, validation requirements, genuinely the complexity cannot be underestimated. So the organizations that succeed approach e-invoicing as a strategic transformation, not just a compliance activity, right? So before selecting any solution, you really need to thoroughly assess your readiness across multiple dimensions. Is your organization prepared for this shift? Many companies today underestimate the change management which is required when moving from traditional electronic invoice processes to digital. So consider this, is your data truly ready? Now, from my experience, I've noticed over the years that data quality issues often only surface during implementation. So things like inconsistent supply information, non-standardized references, incomplete master data can really derail your project timeline. So perhaps most critically, have a think, do you have internal resources to manage this project? So e-invoicing, like we talked earlier, touches multiple departments, finance, IT, procurement, tax, and they all require dedicated champions with both the authority and bandwidth to drive this change. So with these mandates accelerating globally and deadlines often leaving little room for good planning, the strategic approach here is to start your readiness assessment now, even when your specific countries haven't been announced yet. So the companies that approach e-invoicing proactively rather than reactively not only ensure compliance, but position themselves to capture all of the benefits that properly implemented e-invoicing can deliver. So in a nutshell, there really isn't a plug and play solution. You will have to do internal work and align internally with all of those departments.
Absolutely. I think that's really valuable information for anyone on their journey. So, I mean, a little bit tied to this question is that we asked people a bit more hypothetically, if they had to, implement e-invoicing, whether they're doing it again or they're planning their journey on e-invoicing in multiple countries, what would your approach be? So people could tick multiple things on this list, but the key standout ones here is that 70% of people cited the need to actually have a global e-invoicing strategy as opposed to a regional or country-based one. 54% said they need to establish a centralized company-wide strategy, and 51% say they would want to work with a single provider. You can see much lower on this list here, only 13% of people said they'd want to rely on their ERP for e-invoicing, and 13% said they'd rather work with multiple partners, providers. 6% said they'd want to use multiple local service providers. Just 3% wanted to allow individual countries to manage their own e-invoicing strategy. And a brave soul wanted to build an e-invoicing IT in-house solution. So we'd get your take
Uh,
on that as well.
yeah, I have to say I'm so relieved to see that only 1% of our poll participants are brave, brave enough and adventurous enough to build their own e-invoicing solution. So that's good news, right? Now, from my perspective, what's becoming increasingly clear is that e-invoicing landscape, within that landscape, working with a single provider isn't just convenience, it's strategically critically. So, like I said, historically, e-invoicing mandates were predominantly the concern of accounts receivable teams, right? So AR department would handle the outgoing invoice, ensure compliance with local regulations, and the story would end there. Now, as we've seen today, particularly with evolving mandates in countries like Belgium, France, Poland, that e-invoicing is fundamentally transforming both sides of equation. So the clearance model, which is part of what VIDA, VAT in the Digital Age, is rolling out to standardize processes, require every invoice to be reported and authorized electronically before it's sent to the buyer, which means that both AP and AR will have to ensure invoices are accurate and compliant. So this isn't accounts receivable problem anymore. It really is an enterprise-wide challenge. So what I've learned from organizations that successfully navigated these mandates is that when AP and AR operate in silos, they create unnecessary complexity. The data from one team doesn't flow onto the other, validation issues multiply, and you end up with those fragmented processes that increase risk of non-compliance and operational disruption. So when you're looking at having AP and AR separately and having different providers handling different aspects of your e-invoicing ecosystem, you're essentially building walls within your own financial operations. So importantly, you lose standardized overview and control of transaction, which are absolutely essential for real-time compliance. Now, if you think about it, if your AR team is using one solution, your accounts payable team is using another. Now, the question here is who has the complete picture of your invoice lifecycle, and who is responsible when an invoice gets rejected during validation process? So those are the questions to ask yourself when you're considering different solutions or different way of managing this. Now, from my perspective, the organizations that will thrive in this era of mandated e-invoicing are those that recognize that this isn't just a technical compliance project, it's a fundamental transformation of how financial information flows through your business. And transformation simply can't be optimized with a patchwork of different solutions or providers.
Right. I think that's just absolutely a key takeaway there again. And it's not just a compliance exercise. Like you said, it's the fundamental transformation about how information flows through your organization. So I think that is one of our great takeaways from our findings today. So just to touch base where we are on the progress of the webinar, we've sort of wrapped up about the information about our surveys, the findings, key drivers, priorities, and what people wish they knew before e-invoicing. So now we are going to get into the 5 mistakes that companies keep making, as well as some updates on some of the compliance issues in Europe and some Q&A. So let's go on to what mistake number 1 we identified is. So based on our findings, we see that companies think that e-invoicing is a plug-and-play solution. And many people just underestimate the complexity, and 45% of our respondents wish they knew about the significant integration work involved. So it'd be good to get your insight again, how people can avoid this going forward.
Yeah, and Sarah, like we said, there's no such thing as truly plug and play e-invoicing solution. And every organization, regardless of size and industry, will face real challenges when it comes to integration, data quality, and adapting to these evolving mandates. And often what we've noticed, it's not really the technology that holds things back. It's very often inconsistent data, non-standardized formats, and supply inconsistency. If you add that to the complexity of country-specific regulations, and you've got an environment where success depends on flexibility, readiness, and a very strong execution. So I think that's why it's really essential when you're looking outside, if you're looking for a provider, look for someone who offers more than just a software. So one of the most critical questions you should ask any provider is, how will you support us through this? Most of them will tell you it's easy and then just leave you to figure it out. I think it's really important to look for a provider that can support you with hands-on guidance around data preparation, integration planning, and change management. Ask them how they'll help operationally with compliance, not just technically, but cross-functionally, right? So, and ideally choose someone with a strategy for connector or dedicated implementation expert who can ease that burden of integrated into your existing systems. So the level of support is what separates those short-term go lives to long-term strategies.
Yeah, I think that's great insight. And hopefully, again, one of the key takeaways today is really to start planning or your integration in advance. Now, mistake number 2 that we identified is focusing only on compliance and ignoring the bigger picture. When I was watching the survey results came in, it was a bit of a race between efficiency and compliance for that number 1 key driver, but compliance came out top in the survey, and 51% said they were driven primarily by the mandates, and perhaps they may be treating compliance as the finish line. But as we've been discussing, e-invoicing offers so much more. So it'd be great to get your insight on how to kind of avoid this compliance only mindset.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. I think one of the most common pitfalls we see in organizations when they're focusing solely on compliance and they treat it as the finish line rather than the starting point. So it's understandable, right? Mandates are urgent, the pressures to meet them is very high. But when compliance becomes your only objective, companies kind of miss the broader value of e-invoicing. Things like process automation, real-time insights, and improved cash flow visibility. Let's not forget about that, right? Now, the truth is, even if organizations don't prioritize those benefits up front, they almost always will circle back later wanting to unlock those greater efficiency. So in a nutshell, a compliance-only mindset may meet today's need, but it can really seriously limit tomorrow's potential.
Right. I think that's super helpful insight. Thank you. And mistake number 3 that we identified is overestimating your ERP's readiness. So what we found that 42% of our audience said they trusted their ERP to handle e-invoicing, and 58% expressed doubts. But really, the reality is the ERP is frankly just not set up with VAT, indirect tax compliance mandates at the forefront, and may struggle in the long term to keep up with the local mandates. So I know you talked to lots of companies on this journey. It'd be great to get your insight on how people are assessing their ERP's readiness. You did mention some
Yeah, I
questions
think
to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the common pitfall is assuming that ERP is ready to handle e-invoicing out of the box, which I've heard many, many times, and we've covered that earlier. That's not true. Now, most ERPs really weren't built with indirect tax, VAT logic, or real-time compliance requirements in mind. And that's why it's really important to look beyond the platform itself and evaluate how a provider can support ERP integration. So specifically, I think it's also important to ask whether they offer certified connectors tailored specifically to your ERP, because those connectors can significantly accelerate compliance readiness and actually ease of use for you. So even if your ERP isn't natively equipped, those connectors can really support you through the journey. Also, I think considering whether they work with implementation partners who can truly understand your ERP's architecture is another thing to consider when you're looking at this, right? So, because that expertise can really bridge gaps quickly and reduce project risks. And ultimately, it is about validating your ERP and enhancing it with the right tools and the right tools to meet today's mandates. So ERP is there for you. It will always be there, but it's important to enhance it a little bit to make sure that they can cover you on all of these journeys.
Thanks. I think that's really helpful for anyone looking at leaning on their ERP, and maybe what else they need to be considering. So let's move on to mistake number 4, and that is undervaluing the importance of integration and implementation. Now we know that integration and multiple countries' capabilities are essential. Sometimes they're not prioritized until a little bit too late. We found that 65% of our audience said that workflows and ERP is critical for their program, and 70% recognize the global strategy is key. However, in reality, we see a lot of people still taking a bit of a patchwork approach. So we'd like to get your take on the pitfall that people are following to here, and how they can avoid that.
Yeah, absolutely. Integration and implementation are two sides of the same coin when it comes to e-invoicing, right? And it's so critical to think about them together right from the start. Very often organizations rush to meet new mandates without preparing internally. But I think integrating with your ERP workflows and your procurement system is one of the biggest challenges you'll face. And it's not really just about a technical lift. It requires clean, validated master data across customers, products, and orders, because that's what you'll be reporting to tax authorities. So if you delay those foundational steps, timelines will slip and compliance deadlines will become high-risk fire drills. So that's why you need to assemble your project team early, assess your IT's bandwidth, and build a realistic business plan. And again, talk to your internal teams, because it's not just IT team, really align internally. And there's another level, right? Consider the cost of using a different provider in every country. So beyond procurement complexity, if you're using up the beyond the procurement complexity, you're signing up for a redundant IT project if you have fragmented data models, and which will provide you with zero economical scale. So managing multiple platforms will create an operational drag, and it will undermine a very efficiency of e-invoicing and what it's meant to deliver for you and your organization.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, the real value of integration, getting IT on board early is coming across loud and clear. So let's move on to our final mistake number 5 that we see people making, and that is choosing providers who can't support your organization's growth. Again, I just thought it was interesting in the survey how kind of low customer references and reputation ranked, but really with so much at stake, there's a lot that is required to vet providers and go beyond just their promises and feature lists. So I'd just like to get on your take on what people need to ask when looking at a provider, not just to meet their needs now, but their needs for the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Sarah. When evaluating those e-invoicing providers, one of the most critical yet overlooked factor is scalability. Now, not just in terms of transactional volume, but in adaptability to this rapidly evolving regulatory landscape. So the reality is that e-invoicing mandates are never static. They constantly evolve, often with little notice and significant technical implications. So if I share an example with you, if you don't mind, when Italy implemented its e-invoicing mandate, it underwent over 42 iterations to its technical specifications and requirements. Now, think about what it means for organizations using traditional EDI or point-to-point connection. What it meant for them is that they had 42 separate IT projects on the go just to maintain compliance with a single country mandate. And if you consider that if you had a separate provider in every country doing that, you have no overview of what exactly is happening. So that's the problem here, because those mandates, although they go live, they constantly move. Now, this pattern is repeating across the globe. So Poland KSEF system has already gone through multiple significant revisions before even going live. I'm not even going to start on France. We all know it's been pushing and moving. And in today's world, this is a new normal in e-invoicing landscape. So the organizations that thrive in this environment aren't trying to build and maintain these connections themselves. They're partnering with specialized providers who can absorb this complexity on their behalf. So when evaluating potential partners, look beyond their current capabilities and assess their track record of adapting to these regulatory changes. And maybe ask them if they are a truly global solution, or do they use third party to connect to those authorities. So it's also important to know that your provider is covering you end to end. Now, the right partner becomes really an extension of your tax and finance function. So they will continuously monitor regulatory developments across your operational footprint and proactively implement changes before they even impact your business. So remember, the real value here isn't just in meeting today's requirement, it's in having a partner with the expertise, infrastructure, and commitment to shield your business from this relentless wave of regulatory change. Now, choosing a vendor that doesn't just solve today's compliance problem, but makes your entire e-invoicing journey is what you should be really seeking out.
Absolutely. I think that's really eloquent there, and I think a great thing to think about when people are on their journey. Just want to mention we got a few questions coming in, just asking about the recording and the slides. Yes, they will be available shortly after the webinar. And if you do have any other questions, you still do have a bit of time to put them to us. But you did mention, Sandra, the wave of compliance rules, regulations coming into force. So I would just like to, for the benefit of everyone on the line today, if you could just give us a bit of an update on what's going on, particularly in Poland, Belgium, France.
Yeah, of course. So France, Poland, and Belgium, they're setting the pace for e-invoicing transformation in Europe, but each is taking a very distinct approach. So in France, we're seeing a phased rollout. Large and medium businesses will have to issue e-invoices and report from September 2026, and smaller businesses following in 2027. Now, the focus here is on, of course, closing the tax gap and that driving the digital productivity, but the timeline has shifted so many times, which of course highlights the need for flexibility on your part and readiness. Poland, KSEF system will be mandatory for large taxpayers from February 2026, and for all other businesses by April that same year. So except for smaller subset of digitally excluded entities, so there's smaller entities will have to follow a different timeline. Now, the Polish model is very structured and technical, requiring businesses, both domestic and foreign, to adapt very quickly. So again, keep an eye. So Belgium, so mandating B2B e-invoicing for established businesses from January 2026, with real-time reporting coming in 2028. So again, the scope is currently limited to domestic transactions, but the government has signaled that broader requirements are on the horizon. Now, what we see in here, that these mandates are very complex, they evolve, and they're very much interconnected. So from your organization standpoint, you would need to have a proactive, scalable strategy to comply and to turn compliance into this competitive advantage as Europe's digital tax landscape expands.
Thank you. And again, if you have any other follow-up questions, please do submit it in a little question box. But yes, so we will be moving to Q&A, but I just want to say, yeah, thank you for a fascinating session here. And I know I always learn so much when I speak to you. So just as we move to Q&A, I'm just also going to put a little poll question up here. If there's any particular follow-up you'd like from this webinar, you can take it all to the supply here if you want to call more information on compliance, e-invoicing, a demo. So you can just have that up while I go to the first question. So Sandra, you mentioned that data being a key issue as part of a readiness assessment and something that often holds people back on their e-invoicing journey. Can you give our listeners some information on what they can do to help prepare their data before starting to speak to e-invoicing providers? What do you see as generally makes a successful program?
Yeah, I think partnering up with the right either advisors or working with partners who can support you through this journey, it really is depending on the size of your organization as well, right? If you're a smaller entity, you're looking at and you have internal resources to look into your data, have a look as to what those mandates that are coming up within your region, what do they require of you? And then kind of prepare your internal systems accordingly. Again, speak to partners, speak to your advisors. They should be able to support you through that.
Great, thank you. And you also mentioned a bit more of the readiness assessment you discussed. What do you think are some of the key priorities to include other than data in your readiness assessment, like including time with IT? So what would you recommend that people put in their readiness assessment?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So when you're looking at your readiness assessment, firstly, of course, make sure that you have available resources internally. Make sure that you give yourself enough time before the mandate goes live. And again, make sure your data is ready. Review what that mandate will require you to follow and manage your data internally based on that. And again, use all of the partners and your support as much as you can just to make sure that you are prepared when those mandates go live.
Right, thank you. I appreciate you may not have a visibility of the mandates going forward, but I guess in your opinion, do you see most countries maybe moving to mandates that have a standard format, and how realistic do you think that might be? Companies harmonizing their formats.
Yeah, I think that they're all different, and that's the challenge of e-invoicing, right? Some, of course, are similar, but every country decides to do their own thing. Things will change with the VAT in a digital age, which will standardize e-invoicing across Europe. However, again, that's not going to be until 2029 to 2030. So until then, you really need to just make sure that you have a visibility as to what the country mandate is, which format it needs, etc.
Great, thank you. And do you have any tips for people on getting IT on board when they need to assess the IT spend for integration? Are there any key questions, concerns, or how do people engage IT to help get their IT team ready?
Yeah, I
Any
think
tips for
maybe
people?
it's important to speak to them early enough to see, I've been through projects where we had to put it on hold because they were actually going through ERP transformation. So IT wasn't ready for another 18 months. So make sure that there aren't huge projects that will be roadblocks for you, because if they're going through an ERP transformation or anything major like, change of ERPs or any other major project, chances are they won't have the time to focus on e-invoicing, again, depending on the size of organization. So, really make sure that you've you've spoken to them, that they have the time and resources to allocate for this project.
Thank you. Another listener just thanks us for a great webinar, but actually just asked for a bit more on the further benefits of implementing e-invoicing beyond the mandates. What do you see as people capturing the biggest benefits when they have a successful program?
Yeah, of course. I think outside of compliance, it gives you the control and visibility of your
Mm,
transactions internally. So it becomes less just about compliance. It gives you an opportunity to make your internal process better, that you have internally an overview of what's gone in, what's gone out, and you can plan in advance. So additionally, the benefit is that you don't have a patchwork system. It's all in-house. You wouldn't have to speak to different providers on different sites. It creates a web that's very difficult to manage. And trust me, I've seen it so many times. And you speak to people, they have, a provider for AP, provider for AR in different countries. So the web, it becomes a lot more difficult to manage in a long term, providing you with a very high cost in the long run, rather than investing into an e-invoicing solution. Now, the other thing, sorry, I was just to add, consider the fact that a lot of countries have, outside of just, e-invoicing compliance, also have additional requirements such as e-archiving, digital signatures, QR codes, etc. So if you are doing this externally or internally, you're going to have to figure out how to do it. So that becomes, again, a separate provider who will supply you with a QR code or an e-archiving system. So again, just that web that keeps growing and growing and becomes quite difficult to manage.
Thank you. Another question coming in about, do you see the e-invoice project as, should it be an IT-led project, or do you think it works best when driven by another function? I guess ideally it'd be cross-functional, but where do you see successful organizations being driving e-invoicing?
Cross-functionally,
Yeah.
100% cross-functionally, because unless IT has great input from tax, IT is looking after their own function. They're not really considering the complexities of finance. They don't really have the visibility of what that means for finance. And vice versa. In fact, if it was just finance, they wouldn't see what the issue is, with IT. So definitely bringing in people is the right way of approaching this. IT, your finance team, tax need to speak together, because otherwise it just becomes IT will get a solution that doesn't fit finance or vice versa. So
Great. And another listener, interested in our response, or a bit of our kind of your strong feeling against building an in-house solution. And if you could maybe just provide a bit more about, the risks of doing it in-house versus having an external provider.
yeah, so I think just I've highlighted very briefly. Now imagine if you send in or receive it, you have to comply in one country. Now, maybe if you comply with one country, you may still be able to do this internally by having a point-to-point connection, but that would still mean, like I said, like in Italy, for instance, they had 42 iterations to a mandate, and all of these mandates so far have been very kind of unstable. So that signals to me that there will be unstable once they go live as well. That will mean that internally you have to have a very robust IT team that will keep up on top of those mandates, keep up on top of those changes, and keep you compliant. So the benefits outweigh. You really are going to be spending so much of your internal time, which will become quite a costly exercise. Now, add to this, if you are expanding into different markets, that would mean that you would have to then look at what's happening in country A, country B, how are you staying compliant, is the mandate changing? No one has from your internal team, unless you have a separate function that will actually track those changes. You wouldn't know unless you are non-compliant or too late or something has happened. So that's why I think internally it becomes quite a very complicated task.
Great. Thank you. I think nearing the end of questions, one more has just come in. Let's see if we'll squeeze a few more before the hour. Do you ever talk to Treasury? And someone's asking if the Treasury teams should be involved with the e-invoicing projects. I deal with them less. It'd be interesting to see if you've had interaction with Treasury teams being as part of the
Yeah,
e-invoicing team.
yeah, absolutely. I think, again, there would be also quite an insightful function to include, and someone who can have and could have a planned involvement in this project. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay. I think that's nearing. If there were some questions, maybe very country specific or technical, I think I'll just refer those to the team at Avalara to follow up. And I just want to say that,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, Sandra has been fantastic to work with. The whole team at Avalara are really lovely. If you do reach out to them, they are just, compliance experts and have always been just lovely to work with. So we do recommend, if you are interested in compliance, they are a lovely company to work with. Just remind you, we have a few other webinars coming up, one's on the invoicing and Vita at the moment. So we'd love to see you on that. But again, just a really big thank you. Thank you everyone on the line today. Thank you for asking some really lovely questions and for participating in all the polls. We love to see you out there participating. Sandra, you've been fantastic to work with, and thank you for all the insight you provided. And again, the team at Avalara. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you for on the line today.
Thank you,
And we
everyone.
hope to welcome you at the next webinar. Thank you all and goodbye.
Bye-bye.